What is up, guys? Okay, so check out this quick clip of Walker and I having some deep conversation about cryptography, security, cryptocurrency, and really what is the meaning of life and what humans should really be focusing their efforts on. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoy. So where did security start?
Well, I think originally there wasn't any security, right?
You just left your stuff on the floor?
Yeah, you just stockpiled your food in a cave, right? And then you hope no one found it. You hope no one found your cave, right? So then, security was a function of how good you were at hiding your food, right? But then it got to the point where, that was always a function of like how remote how remote of an area was. People would eventually stumble upon your unhidden food in your cave. So, the first security was basically keys, right? I carved a bone key and I put together a little mechanism and I put a lock on, and the person who had access was ostensibly the one person who had the key. But then hackers figured out, hey, I can just make a copy of that key, So then they focused on making the physical keys more and more complex, right? More
notches.
More notches in it, more physical changes to the key to make it harder and harder to replicate. Now,
so when they're making those changes, effectively what they are doing is encoding data into that key, right?
Essentially, yeah, physical data. Right. They're basically encoding. It's physical data that they're encoding. Well, then you get to a point where you require two people to have two different keys to access your stockpile of food, right? So you create two physical keys. I give one to you, I give one to me. We both got to be there. We both got to open the safe together, right?
Right.
But even then, those can be counterfeited, right? So then we create a mechanism where there's one key that's always changing. Lock gets changed every single day. Now I have a key that gives me permission to open this lock. That key gets changed every single day. So now I've got two people, one on one end, one on the other. But how does the person who's got the key to the changing lock know that my key's not counterfeit? They don't. So I still show up with a counterfeit key. They have the key to the daily key, but they use my facial recognition, or, hey, I know that he's the guy who's got the key, right? So I'll trust him. We'll both open up and grab the food, right? You look at the evolution of security. Mm-hmm. There's one person
who has access.
Well, yeah, there's always someone who has access, which means that it becomes the path of least resistance becomes a gun to someone's head.
What's that called?
The shotgun method. Andrew Geiger. At some point you can make it really, really hard to log into your, we deal with this all the time, our clients' security systems to get on their VPNs, right?
Like a brute force becomes increasingly difficult, but we're also getting increasingly more computing power.
Right.
So it's like an arms race.
But what's the one thing that our clients' VPNs don't take into account? The fact that I might share the laptop that they gave to me with somebody else. Right? I mean, it's the, I could take the laptop and I could share it with somebody.
Yeah. And
give someone that they don't know, who's not supposed to have access to their network, access to the network.
Right.
It's one thing that they didn't account. There's always a failure point in all security.
Right. There's a trust factor.
Right. So, when you look at, there's no such thing as security.
Yeah.
There literally
it's obscurity.
Correct. It's you place enough hurdles in front of people to make it hard enough for them to deter them, but you don't want to challenge the wrong people to try and hack you, because they will. we work with brilliant people every day.
Right, but then those people we put into high security prison, like we physically lock them,
So how many cloud-based servers does Intellec have running right now? We probably got
a dozen.
More than that, maybe 3 dozen, I think now, right? 20, well, definitely more than 20, anyway.
Okay.
So, how many hackers from Russia and all over are scanning our network all the time? I mean, we see the reports, right? And they still can never get into our systems, right? And we just use regular Windows authentication in some of these dev environments, right? As long as there's no risk, there's nothing on that server that's of any value. We don't make it hard to get into the server because it decreases our efficiency.
Yeah.
What I think the future of security is high-level security. Rather than trying to secure the entire network, what you really ought to do is the level of investment you make into security should be inversely proportional to the risk of the data. So, it should be proportional to the risk of the data. So if the data needs to be super, super secure, then we invest a ton of capital in protecting it. If it doesn't matter, right? I mean, if it's, let's say it's a file share that contains non-IP, and then don't make it hard to access that at all. Right. You know why? Because you're gonna achieve efficiency gains, and you're gonna save capital.
Right. That's kind of like the whole concept of IIoT.
Exactly. That's the point. It's rather than taking this put a wall on the southern border of the United States approach, right? Rather than try to keep everyone out, what you ought to do is try to protect specific installations.
Right.
Because that is a better investment.
Let everyone in, but then just protect the key people.
That's right.
Protect the important information. What is important information again? Because when I look at my own data, there's really not like much that I would worry about other people. Like, I don't care if someone reads my text or sees my photos.
Well, okay. So not all organizations are transparent. Okay? So if your organization is built on the concept that information is power, and therefore, like, we're in salary negotiations. I'm your manager.
The less information I have.
The less information you have, the more likely you are to accept, or let's say the more likely you are to accept less money, right? And then I get you in, and I keep you in. I overwork you so you can't go get a different job or whatever. But if you're like at Intellec, where we're sharing this information, I mean, everyone knows how much everyone else makes, and everyone knows what the margins are, and then they can do their own calculations and say, well, I'm not getting paid my market value or whatever commensurate based on the revenue I'm generating. If you're the type of organization where information is power, well, then you want to keep people from information. But imagine you're a chief executive of a large organization. The value of having really, really smart people, tens of thousands of employees that you've hired, who in theory are brilliant people, otherwise you wouldn't have hired them to begin with. Imagine you took all your key data and you threw it in the hands of the whole organization. Imagine what they would do with it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, look at what...
Like information like giving financial information to your finance analysts.
That's right.
Like giving control and production information to your control engineers.
Think of it as this way. Think of it this way. It's open architecture for your internal systems.
Right.
Right? Look at the open source community. Look at what unpaid people who are not being paid at all, the open source, the unpaid contributors, these brilliant contributors who just by virtue of having access to the source code can vastly improve software in such a short period of time. That is the metaphor, that is the example for what an open architecture business would be. And this whole conversation started around the history of security, but the point is that I believe that most organizations have been fighting the wrong battle for a really, really, really long time.
Yeah.
And that the battle that they should be fighting is their own culture. That is,
and that's what Andrew said.
exactly, fighting against their own culture. That's the battle they need to be fighting.
Like you said, that they shouldn't be investing in security, but they should be investing in the stability of the society.
That's right. At some point, you get to a point where it's more cost effective to invest in social stability programs and measures that make society more stable, which pulls away the incentive for people to try and steal your data,
right,
your money, right? It becomes more cost effective to invest in social stability than it does to invest in new ways of protecting your data, right?
Don't tell that to Silence, though, man.
Well, there's a whole bunch of companies out there that would completely disagree, and they're going to write white papers, if they ever see my thoughts on it. But I mean, it's a
fun thing to think about.
Right. It's a complete paradigm shift, and it's more of a thought experiment than anything. But it's a thought experiment rooted in reality.
Right. But it's not just a thought experiment, because you are running your organization that way.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. We run our organization. Our organization is built on open architecture. I mean, not only do we use platforms that are open architecture, but we run our organization with an open architecture. And the value that we get out of that is super, super fast development of our personnel, a much more alignment of thought across the organization.
Attracting and retaining top talent.
That's right. No politics. If you want to talk about probably the biggest difference between us and we just don't have the internal politics that other, it's like so-and-so talked about, oh, did you hear? It's not, it's just, all the things that come out of that. It makes people uncomfortable to think, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a leader and you're not qualified. Let's say you're an MBA. I was really good in college and I got a great MBA, but I don't know my head from my left foot. And I have no business leading people. We've all met those types of business leaders, and there's lots of them out there. If you're that person, you would be incredibly uncomfortable in an open architecture environment. If you're a person who's elevated in your career purely based on your political acumen, you would be incredibly uncomfortable with an open architecture because you're exposed. Right? Yeah. You become exposed.
Yeah.
But I believe that the advantages of the open architecture organization far outweigh the downsides.
Well, yeah, they're actually making an impact.
Making a huge impact, yeah.
So what's the meaning of life?
The meaning of life is, our life means nothing. I
just answered that question.
Yeah. Well, the meaning of life, honestly, the meaning of life is, our life truly means absolutely nothing, except for the impact that it has on other lives. That's it. So what it means is that if
reciprocity.
Yeah, if you've had no positive impact on other lives, then your life has meant nothing. It is directly proportional.
So the world is not a zero-sum game.
Not even close. We create capital all the time. We create equity all the time. This isn't electrons, it's not energy. We can't create or destroy energy, but we can create and destroy equity and capital.
Right.
And we create it all the time. Whether that's political capital, political equity, or financial, fiduciary.
Or like the bits that we're encoding into this video, which we're going to distribute and hopefully share and impact someone's life who watches this.
It's equity that didn't exist. It's capital that didn't exist prior to the statement being made. That you create that out of thin air.
Isn't what's crazy with the digital transformation, the rate at which it's accelerating of information flow is exponentially increasing.
This is why digital transformation matters, right? So when you talk to some people, they believe, why do I need to digitize a report? Why do I need to take a report that I've got on paper, okay, a transaction I've got on paper, and spend $10,000 digitizing it because I've already got it on paper? Why would I waste the $10,000? Well, the answer is this. That piece of paper can only be in one hand at any given time. But there's not only it's more likely than not that paper needs to be in everyone's hands at the same time. And that is the power of digital transformation.
And power of video.
That's right. That's the force multiplication of digital transformation.
Because back in the day, this information that you're distributing in words and sound waves could only go to one person or a crowd of people as far as your voice could project.
Correct.
But now we can project this all across the world.
Even faster than we could broadcast it on radio.
This is why I freaking love what it is that I do, because it's like the combination, it's literally one and the same. Like, that's why when you ask me, you're like, don't you miss development? I'm like, I'm developing. Like, I'm developing almost at a larger scale, you know? Like, I'm not just developing one system, like, I'm developing systems of systems, you know? I don't know, it's really crazy.
And they become force multipliers.
Love it, man.
Me too. See you, fam.
All right, I got a question. What were we talking about earlier? So I had a concept, and now that we've kind of had a time to think about it a little bit. So my concept is about a currency that does not get sent, like payments are not sent in discrete chunks, but rather payments are set up as flow rates that occur, like the time at which the transaction happens, it goes to zero. Like it's the delta T goes to zero. Like, so in other words, in calculus words, basically it continuously flows. So like if I'm going to pay you $1,000 per month, I don't just pay you $1,000 at the first of the month and then just sit on it for the rest of the month. That money just continues to flow out, almost like a sand time clock, or like running water, like dripping out of a bucket, just continuously flowing. And I talked about some of the benefits like that would create, like even in a business to business environment. You can consider, like you're a services company, and you have employees that want to be paid, and you have customers that are hopefully paying you. Sometimes that could almost be as like 90 days out, right? But what if the second that your employee is performing work and services for a client, that money is continuously being flowed, through your organization, and your employee is instantly being paid. So by the end of the day, they've already gotten paid for their day's worth of work. Your client has already paid you. You've made that margin, so you can. And if your bills are also set up with this type of system, that's also flowing out to your leases and your SaaS modeling. And it would kind of require like a form of cryptocurrency. And really it would really actually be simple. Like when I tell people this concept, they're like, "Oh, that's too many transactions." Well, no, it's not. It's really one transaction.
One connection, which is a long-term transaction.
Right. So it's a start time, and it's a flow rate, and then it's an end time. Theoretically, it doesn't even need to end, because you could just keep creating new connections that build and build and build on top of each other, and new capital and new flow is created. But what are your thoughts on that, man? Because you're the first person that I've told this that actually remotely understands how this could be valuable. And really, it's not even really much different than our current system. It's just the payment time goes from days and months down to infinitesimally small, like instantly.
Well, and here's the other upside of it, right? Well, there's many upsides.
Yeah.
it's a complete paradigm shift, right? But where I see the value is in increased efficiencies and increased incentives for people to produce, right? Which is ultimately what our economy is built on. So if in theory what happens is the service whomever, well, let's say it's the guy who mows my lawn, right? He's charging me $50 an hour to mow my lawn, and when he gets on site, he checks in. He clocks in. I get a notification on my phone, and I accept that he's clocked in, and immediately money starts to stream into his account. Right. And at the end, he clocks out, or I turn the transaction off, and the money stops flowing. At the same time, I would be able to initiate a connection with someone else that I need, that
maybe he's paying you.
Exactly. So you would have real-time inflow outflow of cash, right? The advantage, like in our business of this, would be our clients could be paying us at the time the work is actually being done.
Which kind of makes sense.
It makes way more sense than it doesn't make sense. Okay, so when you think about it, it makes a lot more sense. So it's rather than having transactions, you have flow, right?
Yeah.
You have flow of currency rather than transactions of currency. The downside here is that how do you forecast against flow? So part of what we would have to do is we would have to derive from the flow of money are discrete values that we would use for forecasting.
Right. Well, you could trend. What would your solution be?
Well, imagine this.
Like you could say, all right, at this point in time, the flow in was this, the flow out was that, and the total accumulated balance was this. But eventually it starts to become less and less about the accumulated balance. Because effectively, you're just wasting capital at that point. You're not flowing it anywhere.
Well, imagine.
You're not putting that capital to use.
How often does everyone balance their checkbook?
At the end of the month.
We do ours weekly. Okay. So every Saturday morning, we go and we export all the transactions from our accounts, and we reconcile them and categorize them, and we have a weekly understanding. But imagine that at the end of every day, you could look in real time as to where was money flowing in and where was it flowing out, and what did my ending balance look like every day. I went to work today, I clocked in, and money started flowing into me as I was doing my work. And when I left, I clocked out.
Yeah. I think it removes like some barrier of entry, right?
Well, it incentivizes...
And friction, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like I need to go like save up, a few $1,000s to lease a place. I could just go work today and get a place today. And as long as my work by the end of the month, like the rate at which I'm being paid is less than the rate at which I'm paying for things, then it'll instantly work out.
So what's the ultimate objection?
That people don't understand it. They're used to the way that we do it now.
I think the ultimate objection is we don't always pay people by the hour. We don't always pay for things by the hour. Our payment of the thing, the item, is not always a function of time.
Okay. But
so then where does the rate of flow come from then?
So I would say to this, so like let's say you have a fixed price project and you may not know how long that would take, right? Well, you could still pay, and I guess this is going to be a very narrow cross-section of the problem that you proposed, but your employees could still get paid by the hour or, continuously if they're on salary. Even at night, theoretically, they could be getting paid continuously. But, technically you'd have a schedule, right? This $100,000 project is going to take 3 months. So they could turn that connection on And, as long as at your certain milestones you're on track of hitting it, then there's no need to stop that flow.
Think about all of the AP and AR people. So all of the money that large organizations spend on accounts payable and receivables, that would just evaporate, right? All the manual transactions that take place right now, especially in the B2B world, all those manual transactions.
You were telling me today about the reason why we do it the way we do it now, like the net 90 and stuff. What's the reasoning behind that?
So what's the reason that a large corporation makes their vendors accept net 90 or net 45 terms? Is it because it really takes 45 days to write a check? I mean, is that the reason? No. Is it because it takes 45 days to process and write the check? No, that's not the reason. Right. The reason is so that, let's say you're an accountant or a VP of finance for a large corporation that's got 45,000 employees and you're doing $10 billion a year in revenue. Well, and you're looking for new ways of generating revenue, one of the first ways to do it is to stop borrowing from banks and borrow from your vendors. So if you do work for me, okay, if you do work for me that has a value of $100,000, so I'm the large corporation, you're the vendor, and you do something for me that is worth $100,000, and I don't pay you for 90 days. In effect, you have loaned me $100,000 that I'm not paying any interest on. Right.
So the only reason why we do it that way is because people like me are willing to accept it that way.
Because I have the buying power.
Right.
So I'm Apple, right? I'm Apple, or I'm IBM, or I'm Microsoft. Any huge company, Amazon. I have the buying power. I leverage the buying power to get you to agree to terms that I ultimately benefit from on the back end.
Right. But doesn't that cost me money, right? In terms of financing that, I have to have $100,000 to float, right?
You paid my interest. Is
right.
What happens.
So in theory, I just end up charging you more to do that same project. I think it all works out, and we're just playing fucking bullshit games with each other, and it's stupid. And humans tend to overcomplicate things and do stupid things. And they try to exploit power.
But does that VP of finance get blamed for you overcharging? No. He only gets credit for getting the $100,000 at no interest. That's the political game. The political game is, in these large organizations, he doesn't get blamed for the fact that you're overcharging the customer. He only gets credit, he or she only gets credit for creating this savings, which is actually offset by higher rates.
So I'm basically saying interest is kind of fugazi.
Correct.
I mean that's a very bold statement. Let's try to refute that. Because what I'm saying is the whole concept of interest and everything is just based upon our backwards way of the way we deal with money right now,
Well, what is interest?
The cost of borrowing money.
You're paying me because I can't use my money. That's what interest is. That you're paying me to not use it.
Right.
You're basically saying, let me. If you're a bank, right? The transaction's still the same. Interest is you paying me to not use my capital, so that you can loan it to someone else and charge them more than you're paying me to not use it.
Okay.
That's what interest is. That's what those transactions are. And what you are doing is creating capital where it didn't exist. There is a market for borrowing money, right? Because I need capital in order to do things. There's a market for that. I'm going to pay you 12% interest. You're going to pay me 4% interest. And so I'm going to pay you. If I'm the borrower, I'm going to pay you 12% interest. If I'm the person who's got my money in the account, you're paying me 4%. No, you're not. You're paying me 1.75 or and the profit that you get is the difference. You're charging 12%, but you're only paying out
Why do we need to borrow money?
Because our economic system is built on transactions.
And so, like, let's think about someone who wanted to build the Burj Khalifa, right? They needed $1 billion to build it, right? Because they needed to pay for all the materials and supplies. And like, could those investors, those people that put the money into the bank and then the bank loaned it to the people, like, could they not just redirect their capital in real time for the use of beneficial projects that then they would want to, they would have ownership in, or I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of how this new proposed system of not thinking of things in discrete capital chunks, but like in flow, continuous real-time transaction.
Well, what's the advantage to the individual? Because you got to remember,
you could basically bootstrap your way. Like, you could start a company and you could just keep acquiring new customers and grow organically much more easily without having to borrow money. Because as long as your flow in is bigger than your flow out, you can scale.
So what is the advantage to society?
I think that it puts more people in jobs that actually create value.
It also there's much less risk to get started. Our entire economy is built on small businesses, right? One of the biggest markers of the economic success is the number of people who've created small businesses in the past year, right? We look at those numbers and we say how many businesses were created. If it's a lot, then the economy is strong because they're filling vacuums. There's needs, there's demand in the market that's being filled by small business owners, and small business owners recognized that there's a place where I can fill this vacuum. I can supply to the demand, and it's worth the risk. But let's say we lower the risk. I create a small business, and from the second I start working with you, money is flowing toward me. Actual capital.
Right.
At the end of the first day, there's actual money in the bank, right? Mm-hmm. But
because we performed work.
Because we performed work. We did some service for you, or we sold something to you immediately, right?
Because human capital doesn't work in this net 90 concept. Human capital is in real time.
And what's the reason that it works in the net 45 and net 90 terms? And it has to do with the fact that at some point,
we created that system.
Right, someone is leveraging their buying power to get those terms. That's ultimately the reason. So you have to understand, as much as I want an egalitarian, society, I do believe there are winners and losers in the world. I believe that there are people who win and there are people who lose, and there isn't anything I've seen in my life to tell me to convince me otherwise. Right. I also believe that people operate by and large in their own self-interest until they feel they've got it made. So once you've earned enough money, you realize operating in your own self-interest makes you feel pretty crappy. Once you're a multimillionaire, once you're a billionaire, once you're a billionaire who's on the downside of your life, what's the first thing they do? It's like giving all their money away. It's not because they're saving on taxes. It's they realize, hey, I want to make a difference. I want my life to mean more than just collecting capital. So,
but I don't know. That's kind of. I'll let you get to that thought.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah.
But winners, I would say they don't win at the expense of other losers, right? Because we said earlier that life is not a zero-sum game. So, like, who's to say what level of, wealth you've acquired is enough for you to actually start operating that self-interest? And if it's to stop acting in self-interest and start being a giver.
Exclusively in self-interest, yeah.
You could technically just have a mindset shift, and as long as, you could actively start living that way, and you would be winning instantly.
Well, what is winning?
Well, like, yeah, you can just change your definition of it, right?
Well, what is winning?
Winning for you may not be what winning for me is.
I think winning is for everyone. Winning is the same definition for everyone. If we keep it at the 10,000 foot level, and that is
your basic needs are being met, and you're feeling fulfilled.
I've met my goals. If I meet my goals, I won. If I didn't meet my goals, I lost. Right? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are, right? If you're a homeless person begging on an off ramp, right? Your goal that day is to get enough money to buy yourself a sandwich, and
So the way that they're setting their goals is what's flawed, and not necessarily. Like, what if their goal was to like read a book that day?
Correct.
And then improve their life by 1% that day.
Correct.
And then, down that path, they could theoretically become a billionaire if that's what their goal
What's
was.
the first thing you're supposed to do when you all should set goals? What's the first thing we should do once we meet our goals?
Set higher goals.
Set higher goals. Right? It's the first thing we need.
And if you're not reaching your goals, what's the first thing you should do?
You should lower your.
Why do people not want to do that?
Get a win.
Why do people not want to lower their goals to the point, like they think it's insignificant, so they're like, oh, like they just fall in pity or something,
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with how we're motivated, right? That we have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, and how are people motivated? Where does your fire come from? Right. Do you have a fire? Right. Does someone have to light a fire underneath of you? I think those are what the questions are, right? But I mean, how many people do you know? Do you know people who don't set goals at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all do. We know that they react to the world. People who don't set goals are reactors. They react to the world around them rather than imposing their will on the world around them. Do you also know people who set goals but then don't set higher goals? Do you know those people too?
Yeah.
Of course, we all do.
Right. I want to be a senior level hitting $100,000 a year and then
coast. I just want to coast, right? They just like, boom, teach me my skill set. Yeah. And now that I know it and I'm making the amount of money I want to make, don't teach me anything else. Do not change anything. Don't even swap out my stapler. Right? I mean, that's why Office Space is so funny.
Right. Wait, so those people effectively stop contributing to society.
Correct.
And they start operating in their own self-interest. So, man, when you look at the world that way, it becomes so simple. It's a binary switch.
They're not putting in. I mean, ultimately, our contribution to whether we're, if you're moving the needle or not moving the needle is a function of, are you putting more in than you're taking out? Right? If I'm putting more into the world than I'm taking out of the world, then I'm moving the needle. I'm really moving the needle if I'm putting more in than I'm taking out, and I'm convincing other people to put more in than they take out. Or I'm motivating other people to put more in than what they're taking out. That's when you're really moving the needle.
That's why those YouTubers are so successful.
That is true force multiplication. Right?
Yeah. Thanks, man. What, you have a final statement? Let's close it out.
I haven't had one of these types of talks in probably more than 2 years. And it's normally with Andrew. Yeah.
Awesome.
See you, man.
Let us know what you guys think down in the comments. Do you guys like more existential talks? Do you guys get it? What are your goals? Let us know. We'd love to talk to you. I'll see you in the comments. Peace out.